Joining the military can be a very fulfilling and adventurous experience for most, but there are some who find themselves knee-deep in downright creepy happenings. These subscribers sent in their allegedly true creepy experiences while they worked for the military. From phantoms on their airbase to creatures the army can't explain, these stories will surely freak you out. One last thing before we jump into these stories. A good friend of the channel known as Heroes in Blue is currently working to push a GoFundMe to help fund a fallen policeman's funeral. The link will be in the description below if you would like to check that out. It would be much appreciated. Now, let's get into these truly creepy tales. This story is a two-parter. Whether or not they are connected, I'm not sure. However, both happened in the same area, and both were extremely unnerving. Let me start with a little bit of info about myself. I served as a soldier in the US Army for the better part of 9 years, and spent some time with a mountain warfare infantry unit. I'm 31 years old, 6'1", and approximately 195 pounds. I'd like to consider myself a fairly competent woodsman, and have always felt at home in the mountains and forests, where I call home in upstate New York. These stories take place in the Adirondack Mountains. Now, I've always had pretty good understandings of the wildlife in my region, the various species of larger game that one could expect to possibly encounter on deep wood excursions. Animals that may give you trouble if you aren't cautious. Animals such as black bear, moose, coyote, fisher cats, bobcats, etc. There is one creature I never bothered with, and that's simply because up until now I was positive it didn't exist. The creature I'm speaking of course, is the Sasquatch. I have a couple of friends who are self-proclaimed squatchers, as they're apparently called, and they constantly are doing research and telling me all about them. This information will become relevant later in this story. So, it's August 12th, deep in the southwestern edge of Adirondack Park. I and a good friend from work, Carrie, had set up camp late that night. We only unpacked what we'd need for sleep and figured we'd finish unpacking and setting up the following day, when we had some ample light and time to do so. The first night went off without a hitch. The following day, we unpacked the rest of our gear, got set up for what was to be another 3 days of pure relaxation, or so we thought. This trip, however, was about to get really weird. As the sun began to set, I got to chopping some wood, building a nice fire, cracked open a beer, and got ready to start cooking dinner. It was a beautiful night, 70-something degrees and clear skies. The fire was roaring and I was already a few beers deep in by the time the sun had set completely. We sat by the fire, listening to some music and laughing, when all of a sudden, we were blindsided by this overwhelmingly rancid stench. It was unlike anything either of us had ever smelled before. Almost like a sour, wet dog, stinky foot, musky smell that literally made us both look at each other with like, whoa, what in the hell? This smell lingered for about 10 minutes or so, and then was gone. We didn't think much of it, and decided to head down to a creek nearby, sit on some rocks, and stare up at the night sky, admiring the abundance of stars. We sat there and marveled at how many we could see. After about 30 minutes, we decided to head back up to camp. Just as we had gotten up, there it was again, the god-awful smell. We paused for just a moment to confirm that we both smelled it. Before we took another step, we heard a huge splash just behind us in the water. We both froze and looked at one another. "What the heck was that?" I said. "I don't know," she said. "Can we go back to camp now?" We double-timed it back up to our camp and sat there for the rest of the night on high alert. For the rest of the night, nothing happened, but that stench would come and go randomly as the wind shifted. The following morning, We went back down to the creek and I grabbed a rock, probably the size of a softball. I thought to myself, and I threw the rock into a random section of the creek around the area we were sitting. Sure enough, it made the same exact splashing sound like the one we heard the night before. Now this is significant according to my Squatcher friends. Sasquatch allegedly has a very unique rancid smell. Also, they have been known to throw rocks directly at or towards people. I'm not sure if what we encountered was a Sasquatch, but I know for a fact that no known animals from that Adirondack mountain area enjoy throwing rocks. Anyway, fast forward to October 12th, exactly 2 months later in the same area. The weather was less agreeable this time, but we weren't going to let that stop us. It wasn't too terribly cold during the day, but it was constantly raining, and at night it did get really chilly. This time around, we were going to get much closer to something that quite frankly scared us both shitless. Our second night at the camp, we had to turn in early because the rain had become quite heavy and the temperature dropped to about 28 degrees Fahrenheit. We got cozied up in our sleeping bags and shut our eyes, listening to the sound of rain hitting our tent and the nearby creek which was now raging from all of the rain. Just as I felt myself starting to drift off, I heard it. A loud sniffing sound, coming from my right side, where Carrie was currently bundled up in her sleeping bag. Unsure if she was still awake, I whispered, "Was that you?" A brief pause, and she replied, "I was about to ask you the same thing." Then again, we hear this loud sniffing sound, loud and long. Not like the typical sniffing you would associate with a curious animal that was being inquisitive. Right after that, a second sniff. I heard slow, deliberate footsteps moving closer to the tent just behind us. They were heavy. They sounded sneaky, but most importantly, they sounded bipedal. Another sniffing sound came. I thought I was going to get killed, or I don't know, I just had this primal feeling. So I grabbed a hold of my machete. What I know about the vast majority of wild animals, even bears, is that they are very skittish. Loud noises tend to scare them off pretty easily. After a couple more steps, I began to unsheath my machete. "Hey!" I yelled. Silence for a good 30 seconds. There was nothing but silence. We didn't hear the pitter-patter of quadruped fleeing in fright from the sudden loud scary man. There was nothing. Then suddenly, another loud sniff, and I heard the footsteps change course and begin to circle around my tent, to my side. Oh crap, I thought to myself, as I could hear this thing literally stop about 3 feet away from my side of the tent and sniff again. It takes a lot to rattle my cage, but at that moment, my heart was pounding. Now, the presence of whatever the hell this thing was bad enough, but the strangest part of the ordeal, all the sound suddenly stopped. The footsteps, the sniffing, it all just went silent, and we didn't hear it leave. As this damn thing just kind of vanished somehow. Maybe it climbed a tree, I don't know. But for the next couple of hours, I was awake, clutching my machete. I heard nothing but the rain and the creek. Just thinking about the whole ordeal still gives me goosebumps. And going back next month, hopefully, whatever it was, doesn't. For an entire year, I was plagued with a reoccurring dream that came monthly. In this dream, Tyndall Air Force Base and Mexico Beach were destroyed by a massive storm. These two locations are next to my town and are connected by a highway surrounded by pine forest. The part of the dream was Tyndall always had buildings wash away and disappear with the rain. I remember in the dream, the shoreline would no longer look the same after the storm passed. It looked and felt so real. The part of the dream that got me was not Tyndall, but Mexico Beach. In the dream, I drove from the destroyed military base down the familiar highway to Mexico Beach. The houses were gone and the sun was setting, only a silhouette of the forest remained. Then, suddenly, a faint glow would illuminate, a makeshift town of sorts inhabited by ghosts. It was as if these ghosts assembled a new little village out of their wrecked houses and boardwalks. I remember entering this village and interacting with the people. They either didn't know they had died or simply ceased to care. They were faded, washed out, and slightly transparent. The thing that stood out the most was the oil lamps hanging over their doors. Their soft glow was not warm like a normal lantern should be. It was as if there was a memory of a flame. The people acknowledged and interacted with me. At one point, they brought me a small bag of sweets because I had no money on me. Their gift to me touched my heart. At the end of the dream, when I left the village, I turned around to see a silent, dark forest once more under the evening sky. No village, no people, no glowing lanterns. There was an emptiness and a sorrow in my heart. These dreams weighed heavy on me because I kept having them often. Thus begins the weird events that I feel are connected to my dreams. Let's begin with a fishing trip I took a few months back after I retired from the military. Mexico Beach was a place my husband and I would go fishing regularly. One night while there, we were alone under a sky full of stars. Behind us was the forest and in front of us was the beach. No one lived on that side because it is owned by the base. There are no houses on that side of Mexico Beach for miles. I remember that my husband went to grab his cell phone that he had left in the car. I told him to go get it and that I would stay here so he could find me. While I was alone and waiting for him, I would see white figures out of the corners of my eyes. I looked further down on the beach and saw the soft glow of an oil lamp moving as if someone were carrying it. The light grew dim and then was gone. My husband returned to me very shaken up and told me that on his way back to me, he thought he had spotted me. When he walked up to the person that he thought was me, he realized that they were wearing a white gown and that it was not me. The person vanished into thin air, and we left soon after. Fast forward to October 10th of 2018. The great and merciless Hurricane Michael came to shore. Me, my husband, my father, and 3 dogs hid in the laundry room while we listened to the wind roar and rattle our home. When we emerged, we saw our town ripped up. This storm was angry and felt as though it were sniffing at its victims. Every single tree around us was either broken in half or torn from the root. Roofs were peeled like oranges, personal objects scattered like confetti. Our world was turned upside down. There was no power or water for weeks. We would soon come to learn that Tyndall and Mexico Beach were completely destroyed, just like in my dream. I remember feeling sick to my stomach with the realization that it wasn't just a dream. I had seen events that would come to pass. The nights that followed the storm were dark and quiet. Something invisible would trigger the motion lights we set up. The lights flashed wildly, but there wasn't anything triggering the lights. Yet, they kept coming on. My dad decided to sleep outside to make sure it wasn't a looter. My husband and I were in our bedroom with the window open, hoping for a breeze. About 1 a.m., we hear an otherworldly scream. I know the sounds of all the wildlife around me because I have lived in front of some woods for many years. This was neither an animal or human. It was a scream full of rage, devastation, and anger. I shot up from the bed and told my husband to get his gun. I grabbed a broom and marched outside to retrieve my thoroughly spooked father. We had trouble getting back to sleep. The night after, I had a very strange dream. In my dream, the ghosts of people who died in the storm came to me one by one. Each of them would hand me a coin and walk off only to disappear. I remember looking into my hand at all the muddy coins. I haven't dreamt of the storm anymore, but the motion lights flash wildly from time to time like that, and sometimes we hear that scream in the wind. This is a true story that I've only told 4 people. This happened while I was serving as a reservist in the military back in 2010. It was that time of year where we were summoned to do annual training, which was 2 weeks long. We convoyed up to Camp Roberts with about 10 HMMVs and reached our destination in about 6 or 7 hours. The max speed limit was 55, no more or no less. We arrived and unpacked and had lunch and then began our training. Skip to day 5 of training. We had been doing a lot of training which mostly amounted to PowerPoints on the screen. I was excited because the next day we would be at the range for weapons qualification and other hands-on weapons. We got up the next morning at 5 a.m. after just doing fire guard from 2 to 3:30 a.m. Physical training was from 5:30 to 7 a.m., after which we had breakfast and went to the armory to retrieve our weapons. I was excited. I was next and I handed over my CAC card, and a few minutes later, I was handed a super clean M4A2. I cleared it and off I went. We began the long but nice trip towards live fire training, a good 5 miles from our barracks. You drive by and see cool training areas like the bayonet training, tank driving classes, 300-meter ranges, etc. We get to our range and begin to see the long process of Weapons 0 and weapons qualifications. I ended up with a 36 out of 40, the best at the boot camp, which was 38 out of 40, so I think I did pretty good. It was around 5 p.m., and we began cleaning up to head back for dinner. After we did a little class on buddy carries, we began to get ready for bed after the last formation to do a head count. My NCO then came up to me and said that I have night guard tonight at the range to watch the ammo. I reluctantly said Roger, Sergeant, and began packing for the night. Water, food, and smokes. I threw on my cold weather army-issued thermals and began heading for our HMMV. I and my battle buddy then began the 30 to 40 minute drive past the gate we just left a few hours ago. The drive was very nice but bumpy. I sat shotgun with my M9 holstered, enjoying a nice dark and starry night. I still remember the huge hills after every bend and turn on the road. We arrived at our range and they were happy to see us. We shook hands and exchanged some info before we said goodnight and they were off to the warm barracks. I was content though. I get to be up all night with a pistol on my side and my buddy's M16 was more than comforting. We knew people weren't stupid enough to come and steal ammo on government property. So it would be a chill night with one up for 1 hour while the other slept and switching every hour. The ammo was sitting in a 20-foot metal trailer you see on 18-wheelers. Doors facing our little cabin, in front was the long, deserted range with the HMMV facing perfectly for a good view of everything. I was asleep, but still half awake. I felt my buddy kick my boots and I opened my eyes. He had that face on, and I knew something was up without asking because we had loaded guns, so it was no time for jokes. We exited the HMMV, guns pointed, and I was behind him and asked, "What's happening?" He said, "I don't know, I saw something." We marched forward toward the metal container and swept around. I saw a super quick bright dash of blue and baby blue light. With that, my buddy dropped to the ground, slumped like he had no backbone. I pulled him to the side and slapped him a few times. He was slurring like he was drunk. I shouldered his weapon, looked up towards the HMMV, and began to drag him. I was tugging and tugging, and he felt like he weighed like 300 pounds. I looked back and noticed a human silhouette a good 15 feet away. I jumped back and fell on my ass. I was so shocked to see another being, I yelled in a hysterical voice, "Stop! Identify yourself! I will open fire if you approach me!" I slowly got to my knees, pulled out my flashlight and flashed the mysterious figure. My heart stopped at the sight of this thing. It was... I can't explain. I was shitting bricks. It's hard to explain. The sight was unbelievable. Half of its body was showing, with the other covered by a thick wooden pole. It stood there like a shy child at a new elementary school. Shy but curious about these new faces. It stood there, 6 to 7 feet tall and super skinny. Its skin scaly and grayish purple. Eyes small and beady, small nose with a big long mouth. It edged out more, exposing its male genitals. Its long, creepy arms stretched out and tugged on my buddy's ACU bottoms. I pointed the weapon at it and yelled no. It let go and just looked at me like it was puzzled. I pointed my handgun, pulled the trigger, but nothing seemed to happen. My gun was jammed. I racked it back and started to pull the trigger, and nothing. But it didn't matter though, this thing was just gone out of thin air. I thought I was going crazy. I sat in the HMMV with my buddy passed out in the back. I chain-smoked my pack with his rifle in reach. I was scared, but at the same time lost. I stayed up all night till the morning. My battle buddy finally woke up not knowing a thing. I told him what happened, but he didn't believe me, so I kept it to myself and only told a few others. When I was 19, already being in the military for just under a year, this is relevant to a point I want to make later, I was home visiting in the summer. A friend and I were camping out in the branch of the Canadian River, where all the locals go mudding and rock crawling. My friend, I'll call him M for this story, was smoking trees and I had just opened my second beer, and we were waiting on 2 more of our friends to come on out. It was an incredibly pleasant night for camping. Perfect weather, clear sky. It was about an hour after sundown and we had just got to our camp, set up and were chilling and listening to music. Procrastination at its best. Our campsite was literally our campsite. It was far back in the most difficult to reach area where you either need to hike for miles or have a serious off-road capable vehicle. It's at the base of a train bridge that spans about 500 feet, with the bridge being about 100 feet above the river bottom and sheer cliffs on either side. Many times we would be camping and trains would go across at night. The conductors would have flashlights out as a little hello when they see our fire, and we would wave back. Because of the age of the bridge, or just their SOP, I'm not sure, they would always slow down before traversing, so it's usually a crawl. This night, we happened to look up and see bright lights over the rim of the cliff. Thinking it was just a train, we waited and watched until the train crested over the rim. That was when I noticed that the bright lights over the rim didn't progress along with the front engine when we actually saw the train. The front car had its own lights, but the night sky was still lit up like there was a train coming. Like I said, normally the conductors would wave and honk their horns, but this one was silent, even when we shined our lights up at them. Then I saw it, hovering above the train and moving at a slower pace, was something that took my breath away. If I had to guess, it was about 15 feet above the train and had all kinds of lights on board. We both stood there and stared at it until it was perpendicular to us. Then it stopped. M started walking towards it with a look on his face that could only be described as wonder, kind of like the look on Abu's face in Aladdin when they first go into the Cave of Wonder. When he got closer to the bridge, it slid to the opposite side until he got under the bridge. Then it slid back towards me. When M saw that he couldn't see anything, he started to come back, and it slid back over the train, which was still moving, by the way. After he got back to where I was standing, a spotlight came down from the craft onto us. The light was so intense I could feel the heat from it. This thing was at least 100 feet away from us. I remember falling to my knees and being unable to look away. I also couldn't breathe properly as soon as the light turned on us, like that feeling you get when you're about to pass out from oxygen deprivation. But I didn't pass out. I don't remember if M had the same experience, because all I was seeing was the light. Then, the spotlight turned off and the craft started moving along with the train again. About 3/4 of the way across the bridge, the craft veered off and climbed at a crazy speed until we couldn't see it anymore. After the thing disappeared, it took quite a few minutes for me to get my mind right again. The phrase we've chosen to tell everyone, then we kept repeating in our head for some reason. Naturally, one doesn't go and plan on telling people anything along those lines unless you want to be branded crazy. M and I had no explanation for what happened, so the following conversation didn't progress past, "Did you see that dude?" I told him what I was thinking about the whole situation and the whole tell everyone part, and he would only shake his head. We both knew it was a bad idea, so until tonight I haven't mentioned it to anyone. Another thing we noticed was that the portable stereo we were listening to somehow lost all power sometime during the event. The batteries in it were dead along with the extras we brought with us. The clock in his truck also reset and the battery had to be jumped the next morning. It didn't have enough power to turn over, only to barely run the electronics. The size of it would have only been similar to a Chinook, except that there was no sound. I've been around and in shit hooks, and they are so ridiculously loud they need hearing protection or you'll get permanent hearing loss. Its acceleration was also greater than that of any helicopter I'm aware of, especially one that size. It was all quite strange, to say the least. It was July of 1976, and John had closed up the shop for the week to take a break and go up camping with his friends to a regular spot they did yearly. They were going camping in the Canadian Rocky Mountains, which are a beautiful place to go and be. He took with him 2 co-workers from the shop at the time, and 2 other close family friends. They packed some beers and of course their guns and tents. They all set out on a 4-hour drive north and arrived later that day around noon or 1 o'clock, at which point they drove their trucks down some forestry roads for a good 30 kilometers into the backwoods. This was because despite machine guns being legal, police and conservation officers of the time would often still bother you if you were using them. Going in, they began to pitch their tents, which mainly consisted of old World War II and Korean War military tents, and stored their firearms in the tents with them in a large box. Their day was spent doing some shooting at just about whatever they wanted, with the exception of live animals. A few beers later and a cooked dinner, they decided to pack it in for the night, at around 11 p.m. The first night, none of the men woke up. However, when they awoke at around 7 a.m., they found a huge amount of the grass in the clearing they had set up pressed down and a trail of grass leading off into the brush directly to their south. This raised a few eyebrows, but they attributed it to it being a deer. During the day's hiking to some of the shooting spots, they stumbled upon a bog in the middle of the trail which had not been there the year before. In the mud, they noticed very large footprints, just shy of being 2 feet long, imprinted in the mud at the edge of the bog. Upon further inspection of the area, they could see the faint outline of some same-size footprints almost 5 feet behind it in the dry ground. The footprints continued straight into the bog and out on the other side. John and his friends were packing serious firepower at the time. John was carrying a Belgian-made FN-FAL battle rifle. All the men carried automatic weapons except for one, so they seemed very confident in dealing with an angry animal if attacked. Continuing on and into the valley about 1 kilometer away, they caught a glimpse of something peeking down from above the ridge. About 3 minutes of walking later, a large boulder about the size of a pizza box, but round, came flying down at them with great speed, which was followed by a noise John said he would never forget. The noise was a blood-curdling scream and growl. Further down the valley floor was another scream which replied to the first. The men quickly turned back, realizing that there was 2 of them, as all of them loaded their magazines and ammunition into their weapons. They made it back to their clearing by sundown, only to find their tents had been torn to shreds and everything was scattered about their camp and torn open. One of the trucks also had a smashed back window and huge dent in the side door, which rendered it useless and unopenable. The men quickly pieced together what was happening. John had always been a believer in Bigfoot and was now positive that they were dealing with one. About a minute later, a friend of John's raised his AKM assault rifle and fired a few shots to the other side of the clearing, saying he saw something huge and black run in behind a fallen tree over the top of a ditch. The men then fired a huge volley of gunfire into the tree and suppressed the ditch and tree. As the fire stopped, that same kind of scream was heard from behind the fallen tree. It was at that moment, from the east of the clearing, a huge creature stepped in. At least, allegedly anyway. John described it as being 7 to 8 feet tall and was covered in pitch black hair, not fur, which was heavily matted. Its face was ape-like according to him. He estimated that the creature weighed easily 600 pounds or more. Without hesitation, John fired his FAL at it. Now, anyone who has a lot of knowledge of firearms knows that the FAL fires a very large 7.62 x 51mm bullet. On full auto, the weapon was hard to control, but John estimates that at least 5 of his shots connected, not to mention the barrage of bullets from other men, 4 whom had machine guns quickly cut this creature down. He swears he had killed it. The sight was something to see, he said, as the creature had been hit over 45 times by various calibers of bullets that were designed to kill humans and nothing else, as they were made for military weapons. All the men immediately jumped into their trucks and sped off to get a forest ranger from the nearest station. Upon returning, the next morning the body was gone. However, the ruins of their camp were still there, along with an incredible amount of blood left from the creature. The blood was even on the trees, and which indicated that several rounds had passed straight through. The ranger took some photos and said that they would close off the service road and investigate. John and his friends returned to their hometown and have never talked about it again until sharing this. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed these creepy stories sent in by people from the military, be sure to hit that like button as it helps me out a ton. If you're new to the swamp, why not hit subscribe, turn on notifications to never miss another video, as I upload them almost every single day on all things natural and supernatural. If you have a story that you'd like to share, whether it be from the military or just a scary story from an average person, be sure to send it in. I have a website that you can send it into, or an email that you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. Now, I have a lot of creepy videos coming for you guys this month. December is going to be very busy for me, so please, if you're sending in stories, be a little patient with me. I will get to them as fast as I can, I promise. See you guys soon with another creepy video.